Hello, in this video I want to talk with you about your viva, which is a meeting that will take place on the 14th of January 2021 between you and your dissertation supervisor. Your supervisor will be in touch with you to arrange the precise time that your viva will take place. And your viva will take place through Teams rather than on campus. In the materials for project on the VLE, on Moodle, you will find a plan for the viva, and this plan takes you through the structure for your viva. So all of the boxes that I'm inviting you to complete in preparation for your viva will answer the questions that your dissertation supervisor will ask you. For example, your dissertation supervisor will ask you about your research question, and there's a box there for you to map out your research question. Your dissertation supervisor will ask you about the literature that you have read to prepare your thinking about the expertise that you are going to gather in order to answer your research question. And there's space there for 3 texts, 3 books or journal articles or government documents that are supporting your thinking. You can have a mixture of books and journal articles and documents, or they can all be journal articles or all books, that's up to you. And the space there, the 100 to 150 words that I've indicated there, is an approximation. These are just the words that you're going to use to prompt you in your discussion with your dissertation supervisor. So to remind you about the things that you're going to say. Bullet points is fine. You want to have something on this piece of paper or on this document that will remind you about what the important things that you are going to say about that particular the content of that particular journal article or that particular chapter or that particular book. In the column with the heading Full Reference Harvard LSBU, you do need to put in the full reference for the journal article or the chapter or the book or the government document, etc., that you are referring to, because your dissertation supervisor will need to check that you understand how to write full references. It's an opportunity for us to check that and to give some feedback to you if you haven't worked that out yet. Your dissertation supervisor will ask you about your rationale. Your dissertation supervisor will ask you, why are you particularly interested in this area of research? What do you find particularly interesting? How does this area of research fit with your previous experience? Is there something that's happened in your own educational experience that's led you into this particular area of research interest? So again, some bullet points in that space to remind you about what you are going to say to your dissertation supervisor. In the next space, your supervisor will ask you about your proposed research methods. So you've already been thinking about this. I've talked about research methods in the live sessions. You've done some reading about research methods, and in this space just some bullet points about the research methods that you are going to use, because your supervisor is going to ask you about that. So have some bullet points there to remind you about what you are going to say. And the next box down there is about setting. So again, where are you going to carry out your research? Some bullet points. We know that because of coronavirus, it is less likely that you will be in school carrying out your research, although some of you who work in schools may be in school anyway. So we know that there's going to be more flexibility about this. But if you are carrying out some research online with online surveys or online interviews, you are still focusing on a particular group of learners or teachers or educationists who are the people that you're going to ask the questions of. So where do they come from? That's your setting. And your supervisor will ask you about that. And finally, your supervisor will ask you to indicate your proposed completion dates. So they're not going to hold you to these. They're not going to chase you when you haven't submitted by the date that you've indicated here. But it is really important that you plan ahead now. One of your responsibilities as a student studying at Level 6 is that you have taken control, taken ownership, taken responsibility for getting stuff done by a set date. So map out when you the dates when you anticipate that you will complete the various parts of the dissertation. And I've indicated there that your completed draft should be ready 1 calendar month before the submission deadline. So the submission deadline is in May. I recommend very strongly that your draft dissertation is ready 1 month before that. So this particular document, you do submit it, but the only section of it that is significant in terms of your grade is this section, is the full references that you submit for the texts that you are referring to. That influences the grades you get for this particular component of project. The rest of the mark for the viva comes from your readiness in the viva, the conversation that you have with your supervisor. So in that conversation you need to demonstrate that you are well prepared. You need to demonstrate that you've thought about your research question, you've looked at literature and absorbed and understood literature, you've thought about your rationale, you've prepared to talk about your rationale, you've prepared and you've prepared to talk about your research methods, your draft, your proposed research methods, and you've thought about where you are going to carry out your research, so who your participants are going to be. So this is about preparing, the plan is about preparing for the viva on the 14th of January. And what your supervisor is looking for is the depth, the thoughtfulness of your preparedness. They're not looking at this plan to look at your sentence structure, or whether you've written precisely 100 to 150 words. That's not of interest to them. What they're looking at is how well you are prepared to answer the questions they are going to ask you in the viva. So it's very much a conversation that you're going to have with your supervisor. And just to remind you, the only bit of the plan that you do need to think about in terms of the written quality is about the full Harvard LSBU references that you're going to put into this space here. So start thinking about this now, start populating these various boxes, and remember that the stuff that you put in the boxes is for you, is a prompt for you to remind you about the stuff that you're going to say to your supervisor on the 14th of January.